Rachel Reeves is facing a nightmare scenario as her economic policies begin to unravel before the public's eyes. Just months after Labour's sweeping election victory, the Bank of England has halved its 2025 growth forecast, signalling that Britain's economic future is far more fragile than Reeves had promised. Yet instead of taking responsibility, Labour is doubling down on its delusional messaging, pushing the dangerous idea that their reckless policies are somehow benefiting working people. Independent economist Julian Jessop didn't mince words, accusing the government of gaslighting the British people over their economic strategy. Labour's entire narrative is collapsing as businesses, consumers and analysts tear apart their contradictions. Reeves had championed a higher minimum wage as a way of putting money in people's pockets, yet economists have rightly pointed out that this burden falls on businesses, not the government, many of whom simply cannot afford it. Meanwhile, Labour is quietly squeezing £25 billion out of employers by hiking national insurance contributions, a move that will cripple small businesses in retail and hospitality, the very industries already teetering on the brink. The cracks in Labour's economic plan are becoming too big to ignore. Reeves has spent months portraying herself as a pragmatic, business-friendly chancellor, yet her own actions suggest the opposite. Jessop pointed to Labour's blatant hypocrisy, exposing how Reeves talks about deregulation and growth while implementing policies that expand the government's role in nearly every sector. He described it as an impossible square to circle. Labour wants economic prosperity while draining the private sector dry. These contradictions are now on full display, and even Labour's own supporters are beginning to panic. It's no coincidence that recent polls show Labour's popularity crumbling. Reform UK is now leading at 29%, while Labour has slumped to 25% and the Tories are languishing at 18%. The warning signs are clear. Voters are losing faith in Labour's ability to navigate Britain through a financial crisis, and the economy is set to worsen before it gets better. Former Labour advisor Matthew Laza delivered an unequivocal warning. Reeves has lost her headroom, and the government is now running out of options. With no space for further tax hikes, Labour is now faced with a painful choice, either massive spending cuts or a full-scale economic collapse. Reeves insists that a return to austerity is not on the cards, but those behind closed doors know the truth. Labour's economic failures mean that deep cuts are coming, and no amount of wordplay will be able to hide it. And this isn't speculation. Labour is already attacking some of the most vulnerable members of society. Reeves's decision to slash the winter fuel allowance has been one of her biggest scandals so far, earning her the reputation as the woman making your granny turn down the heating. The decision has been widely condemned, as pensioners who have worked their entire lives, paid taxes and saved responsibly are now being punished for their financial prudence. Laza made it clear this was Reeves's biggest mistake as Chancellor so far, one that will be extremely difficult to recover from. The public outrage is growing, and with each passing day, more people are waking up to the truth about Labour's economic disaster. But while Labour's domestic failures are dominating headlines, a foreign scandal is brewing, one that exposes just how much control Britain has lost over its own affairs. A shocking new report has revealed that US taxpayer money was being used to fund legal advice for transgender asylum seekers in the UK. This revelation has been branded as massive societal and political interference, with critics arguing that it crosses a dangerous line. The money, approved under Joe Biden's administration, was funneled into LGBT and DEI initiatives in Britain, including pride concerts and gender identity events. Even more outrageously, at least $25,000 was directed to Rainbow Migration, an organisation that helps migrants claim asylum on LGBT grounds. While Britain is facing a cost of living crisis, while small businesses are shutting down, and while pensioners are struggling to heat their homes, American tax dollars were being spent on social engineering projects in the UK. Nigel Farage wasted no time in calling this out, describing it as a leftist, globalist, woke agenda to completely transform the Western world. He wasn't alone. Millions of Brits are furious over this. Blatant interference, and the timing couldn't be worse. With Donald Trump now back in power, he has already begun dismantling the USAID programs that funded these initiatives. The goal? To end the radical influence of globalist agendas that have infiltrated countries like the UK. Trump's approach has been clear and direct. Britain should not be subjected to foreign influence, especially from ideologically motivated US bureaucrats. Meanwhile, as Labour faces economic ruin and foreign interference undermines Britain's sovereignty, Rachel Reeves has another scandal looming, one that could wipe out the savings of millions of British citizens. Reports are now surfacing that the Labour government is plotting to raid tax-free cash ISAs, a move that financial analysts are calling abhorrent. The plan, to either slash or completely abolish the £20,000 annual cash ISA tax-free allowance, forcing Britons to invest in riskier markets instead. This would be devastating for savers, especially pensioners and low-income workers who have relied on ISAs as a safe and stable way to preserve their wealth. By targeting cash ISAs, Labour is attacking the very people who have acted responsibly irresponsibly, punishing them for saving instead of spending recklessly. Financial expert Claire Muldoon was fuming over the proposal, pointing out that 12 million Britons take out cash ISAs every year, many of them retirees who simply don't have the luxury of high-risk investments. This move is not about helping the economy, it's about Labour grabbing as much money as possible to compensate for its financial failures. The City of London has been lobbying hard to push more money into the stock market, but at what cost? The entire risk is being offloaded onto ordinary Britons, many of whom cannot afford to lose their savings in volatile markets. Labour isn't listening, they are desperate, and when governments become desperate, they start taking from the people. The bigger picture is now impossible to ignore. Labour's economic policies are failing catastrophically. Their deceptions about growth, wages and prosperity are being exposed daily. They promise to fix the economy, yet all they've done is increase taxes, punish small businesses and drain savings accounts. Their lies are falling apart and voters are fleeing in record numbers. The next few months will be crucial. Labour is out of options and their last-ditch efforts to save their economic credibility will only deepen the crisis. There is no more room for excuses. Labour has delivered the very failures they promised to prevent. One thing is certain, Britain is waking up and the clock is ticking on Labour's economic delusions. Rachel Reeves and the Labour government are facing a storm unlike any other. The cracks in their economic strategy are no longer just minor fractures, they are gaping chasms, exposing the dire consequences of their reckless policies. As Britain inches closer to economic disaster, the government is grasping at straws, desperately trying to control the narrative while the public grows increasingly furious. The warning signs are impossible to ignore. The Bank of England's halved growth forecast is a disaster for Labour, throwing their entire economic plan into chaos. With businesses reeling from higher taxes and consumers tightening their wallets, Labour's promises of prosperity have turned to dust. Reeves has tried to spin the situation, insisting that Britain is still on the right path, but the numbers tell a different story. Retail and hospitality, the backbone of Britain's economy, are on the brink of collapse thanks to Reeves's national insurance hike, which has drained £25 billion from employers. The same businesses that power the high street are now being crippled by Labour's anti-business agenda, and the fallout is beginning to show. The panic inside Labour's inner circle is becoming impossible to hide. Their poll numbers are in freefall, with Reform UK overtaking them at 29%. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves had banked on public trust, promising to be a responsible alternative to the Tories, but now the people are seeing through the illusion. Labour's policies are failing spectacularly, and instead of admitting their mistakes, they are doubling down on their gaslighting campaign, trying to convince the British people that everything is fine. But everything is not fine. Reeves's attempts to cover up the damage have only made things worse. Her biggest blunder yet, the winter fuel allowance scandal, has turned millions against her. The elderly, who have worked, saved and paid taxes their entire lives, are now being forced to choose between food and heating, all because Reeves thought she could get away with slashing benefits in secret. The backlash has been ferocious, with Labour now facing outrage from their own voter base, and it doesn't stop there. Reeves is now plotting one of the most outrageous financial betrayals yet, a plan to raid cash ISAs, stripping Britons of their hard-earned savings. The Labour government is quietly exploring ways to cut or even eliminate the £20,000 tax-free ISA allowance, forcing people into riskier investments. If this insidious plan goes forward, it will mean that millions of pensioners, workers and savers will be at the mercy of unstable markets, all to feed Labour's failing economic machine. The rage is building, and even Labour's most loyal defenders are beginning to realise that Reeves's economic model is a disaster waiting to happen. Financial experts have torn apart the idea that cutting ISAs will help Britain grow. If anything, it will destabilise the financial security of millions of people. But Labour doesn't care. They are now in survival mode, looking for any way to prop up their collapsing agenda, even if it means robbing the British people blind. But while Labour is pushing Britain towards economic catastrophe, another bombshell scandal is unfolding, one that exposes just how much foreign influence has seeped into Britain's internal affairs. It turns out that US taxpayer money was secretly funneling into Britain to support LGBT and DEI projects, including legal assistance for transgender asylum seekers. This is not speculation. It has now been confirmed that the Biden administration had been sending tens of thousands of dollars to activist groups in the UK, all in an effort to push radical policies onto British society. Nigel Farage has rightly called this out as a shocking example of foreign interference, exposing the globalist agenda that has been quietly influencing Britain's policies for years. Worse, the fact that the US government was funding asylum legal advice for trans migrants in Britain is beyond outrageous. It is blatant political manipulation. And now, with Donald Trump back in power, this insidious operation is being dismantled, with Trump shutting down USAID programs that funded these schemes. The bigger picture is clear. The British government has lost control, allowing foreign forces, globalist agendas, and reckless economic policies to dictate the fate of millions of citizens. Labour is now trapped, with no way out except through mass deception and financial trickery. But the people are waking up. Labour's poll numbers are collapsing, Reform UK is surging, and Britain is reaching a boiling point. The next few months will define the future of the country, and the establishment is running out of time. One thing is certain, the reckoning is coming, and Labour is not ready for it.